Welcome everyone. My name's Jared. I'm the Technical Manager at RAOS, and today I'm joined by Sue, Jamie and Daniel from Jabiru Aircraft, and they're going to be answering some questions regarding getting your Jabiru aircraft back to flight post the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you everyone for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Hey.
COVID-19's been, obviously a different set of circumstances for, the whole of Australia, the whole of the world. I think aircraft usually have periods in its lifetime, periods of storage, whether it's when it's being bought and sold, it might stand for a period of time, and over winter would stand for a period of time. Some parts of the country where storm season, it wouldn't have been flown. But COVID's put a whole, new set of challenges in where aircraft in multiple parts of the country have been standing for extended periods of time. Probably more so than ever, puts the circumstance in aircraft owners' minds about putting the aircraft into storage.
Mm-hmm.
And whether putting the aircraft into storage or we're returning to flight, there are some core factors, especially regarding fuel, which is an important topic to discuss in both situations. So just the topics for this presentation: we're going to look at preparing the aircraft for storage, discussing issues regarding fuel, considerations returning the aircraft to flight, and the recommended cylinder leak down test before getting airborne. The circumstance now where we are October 2021, there'd be a number of aircraft owners that haven't seen family and friends in up to 2 years. So they're going to decide to jump in the caravan and head out and go and see their family, and are not going to be flying the aircraft for a period of time. What is the time duration aircraft owners should consider putting their aircraft into long-term storage?
So our manual stipulates 30 days for flyable storage, and temporary storage is 90 days. So anything after 90 days, then you could essentially say that's indefinite storage as well. So the flyable storage is something that you would just normally do a standard pre-flight inspection prior to that 30-day period, and anything after that 30 days, then you go into the temporary storage procedure.
Okay, so we'll have a look at those three different storage definitions and just some key points. Ensure that the engine has been stopped by turning off the fuel valve, that by not leaving any fuel in the carburetor bowl. But why would you not want to leave any fuel in the carburetor?
The fuel can evaporate over that period of time, and you can end up with debris in the bottom of the carburetor, which is just the chemical reaction in the fuel after it evaporates. So it can be gum, it can be something that can block the main jet up, or any of the carburetor workings.
We do have the option of just draining the bowl rather than running the engine dry. It's just usually running it dry is more convenient because you don't have to actually open anything.
Yep. Okay. And that would be the standard practice anyway during shutdown. It's also just just to understand that it's the best practice. Now the second point is about on a weekly basis rotating the engine.
You mean rotating it by hand?
Yeah. Or
yes. So over time, I guess the oil sort of drains, and turning it over by hand sort of re-spreads what's in the cylinder around. And this is especially so for our older generation engines with the steel bores.
Okay, fair enough. And the engine shouldn't be ground run. I think, a lot of aircraft owners would suspect, especially over a storage period, I think they'd go to the hangar, they'd jump in it, they'd start it up, get it warm, and would be of the opinion that would be healthy for the engine.
Well, yeah, you would think that because you would pump up the oil and it would spray around inside the engine. But the downside is that when the engine's running, it makes all these, water and other things that turn into acid in the water, and they stay in the oil. And, you don't really want acid things eating away at the inside of your engine.
Yeah, right. So that would promote corrosion.
Yes, yeah.
In case.
Which is why we say if you're going to, with flyable storage, at the end you fly it before perhaps putting it in another period of flyable storage. Because when you fly it, all the temperatures come up to a point where most of those things boil off out of the oil.
Okay, and then the third key point to have is to leave the propeller in a horizontal position. So if you were to leave it in a vertical position, that would, potentially be more out of the way, would stop people from walking into it and damaging the propeller. Why leave it in a horizontal position?
With the timber propellers, you can have the moisture or sap in the timber itself can work its way to the lowest point. Obviously, with a composite propeller, you don't have those properties. So a composite propeller doesn't really come into the same question, but that's just general practice that you just keep it horizontal. You also, with the propeller being in one particular point, you will at some stage have a number of valves half open and others that are shut. So by rotating the engine, you will cycle those through. So you may not want to leave it in the exact same position. So one of the valves is open, the other one is shut, and then if you turn it over, it will change that cycle. So you've got one cylinder which is completely blocked off, and the other one which is open, which can absorb the moisture.
Yeah. That was the thing. The additional thing is that if the moisture drains to one blade of the wooden propeller, well, then it will be out of balance when you next go to use it.
Is that a problem that you see on a? Is that a regular issue that you come across?
We haven't had it reported terribly much, but it's a general procedure that it's passed down through aviation since basically like World War One.
Yeah, that's good aviation practice.
Yeah,
and it's the natural characteristics of wood that the sap is going to just drain to the lowest point. So it's just been handed down through aviation.
When we manufacture the propellers, they're made out of hoop pine, and they do start off with a very low moisture content as part of the grading for making the propeller. So it's not something that we would typically find in a pine timber species, but maybe in the hardwoods you can get a bit more moisture sap content.
As part of the propeller manufacturing process, we do a moisture test for every plank that we use to make into a propeller. So the moisture content to start with is important, and only those planks which pass that test keep going through the process to be made into propellers.
Well, thank you for that. It's just following standard procedure.
Yeah,
it's good airmanship. So moving on to temporary storage, as you mentioned, this is up to 90 days. So, up to 3 months. You'd be treating it in the same way as flyable storage, except for temporary storage, the manual states to fill the tank with avgas. So it stipulates avgas and not MOGAS. Why is that?
Because avgas has a much longer shelf life. Like MOGAS invented tanks. I think like Shell says after 2 weeks you should be adding, this is in not aircraft, in motorbikes and stuff, you should add new fuel before you use it again. Whereas they have a stated shelf life for avgas of 6 months.
Yeah. Is there a higher concern about condensation with MOGAS as compared to avgas?
No, not really.
The main concern with the MOGAS is that the aromatics in it are very volatile and they will disappear as the age of the fuel, with the age of the fuel. So then when people start up their airplanes, they have the risk of detonation and all sorts of other nasty things happening with their pistons, because those components of the fuel that stop it from detonating have all disappeared. So it's best to, with two weeks later, to drain the fuel into your vehicle and sorry. And
yeah, but this is just about the filling the tanks.
Yeah, well, we've digressed there.
We're discussing fuel.
Yeah. So that's the reason for that. It's the volatility of the aromatics in it, in MOGAS, if we're talking about MOGAS. And we would prefer it drained every 2 weeks rather than 30 days. 2 weeks is what's in our service letter.
And the reason for filling the tanks full is so it gives the wing tanks no chance to absorb moisture, where if it was half full or nearly empty, then you've got a lot more potential of that happening. And we do not allow the breathers to become fully blocked. So we do have one customer who decided to put their aircraft into permanent storage, block the breathers up completely, and with the expansion and contraction end up blowing the tanks apart, and they end up buying new wings for their aircraft because all of the baffles inside the tank were disbonded from the tank because they didn't allow it to breathe, so you don't block it off completely.
Yeah, that's
Expensive.
That's a really expensive mistake. All right, so that moves us on to definite storage. So for a period in excess of 3 months, in excess of 90 days. So the manual states that in this circumstance, the fuel tank is to be drained. What's the reasoning behind that? Why is that different?
Because even avgas passes its shelf life in that situation, and it's better to just completely empty out the fuel system so that there's no bad fuel in there to make any problems, after it's run out of its life, because fuel does all sorts of strange things when it gets old. And the checks when you're putting a plane back into service after indefinite storage are a lot more detailed. So if there has been moisture in the tanks because they're empty and it's collected, you should be finding it because you're draining the fuel, you're checking the fuel flow through the fuel system at the end.
Okay. So yeah, just to reiterate, now all these processes are contained within Jabiru manuals, which is available on your website.
Yeah.
But this is covering off the storage section of this discussion. Could you please just run aircraft owners through the process for indefinite storage. So those that are, they jumping in their caravan, they're heading off. They don't really know when they're going to return. That's probably the best way to approach it.
Yeah, well, that's it. It builds on the temporary storage, and there's a lot of the processes in there as part of that. But there's extra things like either putting the plane up on supports so that if the tyres go flat, you don't ruin your tyres or get flat spots, and potentially even putting like tyre black on them against their aging, disconnecting the batteries. We do say about checking the charge on, or topping up the charge on the battery every 30 days, and still saying turn the propeller every 7 days. So perhaps if someone was going away, they would have to arrange for someone else to just check on it in that instance. Now it's probably a good idea anyway, in case they discover that, you know, the shed has started leaking on it or something.
Yeah. Or a bee colony's moved into behind the instrument panel. Has happened before.
In addition to what's in the manual, it says remove the battery and store it in wheel drive place and periodically charge. The temptation would be to put it on a trickle charger in the plane, but we've had people that have had very bad experiences with that. Something went wrong with the charger and the plane caught fire. So take it out of the plane, and if you're going to put it on a trickle charger,
Put it in a control device.
put it somewhere else.
No, that's definitely good advice. There definitely have been aircraft fires in the last couple of years carrying out that activity. That's for sure. So, is there any other key items?
Well, there was the bit we talked about before about draining the tanks and not blocking the breathers. Well, and of course, with all these storages, you need to make sure all the things like pitot and static and air intake and probably exhaust is a good idea. Also, should be have their covers on, sealed, because animals just love to block them up.
Yep, especially in Australia, that's for sure. So the process there in the manual is quite detailed. So if you are putting the aircraft away, it's definitely what needs to be referenced.
We also have a note about putting a placard or a sign, something like we say on the instrument panel, to say that the aeroplane is
Not flyable.
Yeah.
It's not. That is a really good idea, because over many months you come back, you've actually forgotten what you've done in a number of circumstances, and to have that reminder on the firewall.
And even
good
in that
practice for them.
it's sold to someone else or something, or you ask someone to go and get it ready for you, and they at least know what's going on. Yeah.
All right. So that will conclude the storage points. Just clarifying, there's nothing else that you'd want to add before we move on?
No.
The returning to flight part of the discussion. So everyone that has, especially in Victoria and New South Wales, who's probably got the worst of the lockdown.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to getting back in the air, and we'll follow these key considerations. And probably the first things first is you want to get to the hangar on a Saturday morning, and your intention is to go flying on Saturday. Yeah. I think the first point would be not to rush getting the aircraft back. even though everyone would be very eager to do that, I think that's probably a really key message.
Well, a lot of the lockdowns have been very sudden, I believe, in Melbourne, so people may not have even had an opportunity to get to the hangar before it was shut down. So probably lots of situations like that where people have been quite unprepared for their aircraft going into storage.
Yep, correct. Because some, a lot of people living in metropolitan areas, and the lockdowns were in regional areas, and they couldn't get out, or vice versa. Yeah. So I do have a second point about scheduled maintenance, and is the annual inspection due? Now, of course, over a long period, carrying out the annual inspection is going to be, definitely the preferred option. Now, an inquiry that RAOs gets fairly often is, well, my annual was due last month, can I go fly it? Is that a common question for Jabiru as well?
Yes, it is. We've got 12 months or 100 hours, whichever comes first. So we obviously do get aircraft in that may have only done 5 or 6 hours through the whole year, but they're still trying to adhere by the rules, and they'll fly the aircraft here. We do it at 100 hourly or annual, which is essentially the same, and that gets them for another year. But it is a common thing where people may not get to do nowhere near 100 hours. So it's something that you certainly have to assess, and if it's a private aircraft, well, they may not do 25 hours each year, but if it's a flying school aircraft that are doing 100 or more hours a year, then it's something that their L2 would certainly have to look at.
Yeah, so an annual inspection for any RAL's registered aircraft is mandatory, whether it's AMNA built, life sport, or type certified. And if the annual's due, it must be carried out, where the aircraft is. If the aircraft must be flown, then a special flight permit can be obtained, and the method that aircraft owners can.
So that's this form 725.
Yeah, correct. So CAS form 725, which they can Google, or they can get on the CASA website. They can fill that out and return it to services@casa.gov.au or to a CASA authorised person. Now, it's difficult to find authorised persons who can carry out this function, but you go to the CASA website and there is a delegate authorised person search. And you need to select CASR 21.200. I do believe CASA are going to, that the new website, make searching for these type of delegates and authorised persons much easier. So when you're looking for special flight permits, you can just select special flight permit instead of trying to find a reg reference.
Okay.
Yeah, because the searching has been a little bit lacking.
What's that? That's right, Dan?
The searching on the CASA website has been a bit lacking. You get all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's difficult unless you're in the industry, knowing what you're looking for, because you're dealing with the regulation types all the time. But, generally I'm looking for, someone to issue a C of A or a special flight permit, or I'm looking for a weight control authority. Yeah, very, very difficult. But in this specific circumstance, you're looking for a special flight permit. CASR 21.200 is what you're looking for. All right, so on to the next item there. So looking at pests, you just brought that up before, Sue.
Yes, only because we saw a photo of a complete beehive in behind a panel, and the person that owned the aircraft, this was in South Africa, was happily flying around with a whole beehive behind the panel for a long period of time. So
how did they not get stung?
yes, I'm not sure, but it's quite amazing. It was not just a little tiny beehive, it was a massive beehive with dripping honey.
Dripping, yeah. So Pre-flight inspection. Thorough pre-flight inspection. Yeah, not carry.
Well, you'd think you'd smell it actually.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, the conditions in Australia for wasps and bees are, it's a definitely great environment. Torpedo tubes are great thing, but also mice. Now, in New South Wales, we've just had a mice plague go through, which has been quite serious. I mean, they can squeeze through a pen, pen holes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. They build nests as well. They can chew through electrical wiring. They can chew through cables. So
Yeah, we've even seen things like this from the tropics.
That was actually the Grantham floods.
Which one?
The floods.
Grantham
the Grantham
floods.
floods.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Did you see that picture? The little frog.
Okay. Where the aileron tube goes into the wing, it has a cover, and the frog was living inside.
So the point, I'm actually quite an avid hiker. And in the last 10 years, I've come across one snake hiking and like 10 snakes at the airport and in the hangar. I love, that warm concrete.
There was a hangar here that did have
Yeah.
quite a large python living in it.
Yeah, and up there. This is actually not that photo there. The snake's not too far away from you guys. It's actually at my parents' place. With parents' neighbours just parked the ute in the driveway on a Friday. Came there on a Saturday afternoon, and there was a carpet python sitting inside. It happens quite quickly, and it's not the type of passenger that you want. To find out that you've got this on board on up.
The vision of the instruments there.
Yeah. So look, in Australia, pests are a real problem, and especially now in the circumstance where aircraft have been standing for a long period of time.
It's even things like birds and have nest and cows and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, we've seen big ants' nests too in cows that where they park them on a tarmac or somewhere where there's a lot of long grass growing up around the aircraft.
Mhm.
The ants can then get into the cow and make big
There's
nests.
potential for them to get in anywhere in the airplane, isn't it?
Yeah, look, we've had. I'm aware of birds' nests, mice nests, and a snake or two hiding in the cow.
Mm.
Like there's even instances of, well, this was actually in a very short period, but small rodent animals chewing through the brake lines
Mm.
because the Jabiru, on the later Jabirus, it's that high pressure nylon tubing.
And they like that, Dan?
Oh yeah, they loved it.
Yeah, look, just so much damage can be caused by pests, and a thorough pre-flight inspection. Again, that's going to always return to the manuals because it's getting back to flight. You do have a detailed inspection, to carry out. But one of those key considerations regarding oil, fuel, battery, and tyres in regards to returning the aircraft to flight. Can you please just expand upon that for Jabiru aircraft owners?
So with respect to the oil, you may have only done 2 hours, 5 hours, or no flying at all within the year, but the oil is a little bit like the fuel. It can absorb moisture content and lose the properties that it started out at. So it's one of the key things of changing the oil for that annual inspection or 100 hour, which is the same. With respect to the fuel, we touched on that earlier with draining the fuel or changing it to avgas if you're running MoGas. The thing with the fuels is we don't want to see avgas and MoGas mixed together. So if you're running Avgas, well, obviously you've got a longer shelf life than the MoGas, but the MoGas is something that we don't want to see avgas put into the tanks.
Because if you mix the two together, you get something that you don't know what the properties of it are.
A fuel company said, well, would you mix your beer and your gin together?
Those guys.
As far as the battery goes, well, we touched on that earlier with the charging of the batteries. We don't advocate lithium batteries in our aircraft because the charging systems are not compatible. The gel cell or which is just a lead acid based battery. If you've got your battery at home charging, well, obviously you're going to reconnect that, making sure that you connect the earth to the battery from the starter motor, because you'll certainly notice when you start the engine that you use the throttle cable as the closest thing to earth, and you end up frying the throttle cable and locking it up. So just to make sure that earth battery cable is connected. The tyres, well, again, you may have only done 5 hours, you may have done 100 hours, but over a long period of time, you can get deterioration of the tyres and start getting splitting in the sidewall. So the tyres are something that is a visual check on the outside of the tyre, not just looking at the tread depth. And,
there's a lot of just going over the whole plane and checking it, not just going, oh, well, they were okay when I parked it. It'll still be okay.
So I just go back just to fuel and MoGas, if it had been left in the tanks for a long period of time, or didn't have a chance to put the aircraft into storage. That when that's left for a long period of time in certain conditions, peroxides could form, and then in the lines, can that attack the rubber, etc.?
We've never seen it attack the rubber. Our bigger concern has been gums and varnishes just completely blocking off the fuel system. That instance where the inside of the tube was filled with a sort of rubbery substance, and the lines had to be completely replaced, and the filter, of course, and everything where it had accumulated had to be changed and fittings cleaned out. It was a complete disaster, and even varnishes, so the first thing you would do is do a fuel flow check if you had been in that instance.
So say you've had MoGas sitting in the tanks for longer than 30 days. What would Jabiru recommend?
Well, take it out, drain it out of everywhere, and put some new fuel and do a fuel flow check of the fuel system. I'm pretty sure in our manual we have specifications for the different engines, what the required fuel flow is. And if it doesn't meet that, well, you've got to go and try and find out why not.
One of the easiest ways of draining the fuel out of the tanks, because we've also got a header tank, not just the wing tanks, is to disconnect the fuel line from the bulkhead feeding to the mechanical fuel pump, and disconnecting that line with a small extension, and then pump that into whatever size drum you may need, and just use the electric pump to pump the fuel out, opposed to having to siphon it or take the quick drain fittings out.
But it is worth, of course, checking that the quick drain fittings still work, because that is one of the first things to get gummed up.
Being the lowest point.
With the old fuel.
And the carburetor bowl too.
If
you haven't had a chance to drain that before you've left the plane, well, all the varnishes and can coat the needles and affect your fuel flow.
You'd need to take the bowl off and give it a once over in there.
Yeah, I think it's a really good message that to get rid of that fuel after 30 days and use it in the lawnmower, not your aircraft.
Yeah, something else that doesn't fly, it's your choice.
Though I think there are some flying lawnmowers, aren't there? Anyway,
They fly very high.
Right, so this brings us to the last point, and there's the recommended leak down test, especially if the machine had been standing indefinitely. Yes, to this. So, what is a leak down test, and why is it done?
The pressure leak down differential test is done just to ensure that there's no leakage between the valves, intake and exhaust valve, and also in the combustion chamber. So by doing a static leak down test, you can actually hear where the leaks may be through the exhaust or through the intake or out the breather. Where a compression test is typically done with the engine turning over, and it gives you a summary of all the three key points, but it doesn't give you can't break that down into an individual area to look at. So you can do it more in a controlled environment where you can turn the propeller slightly one way or the other, and you can actually turn it through the compression stroke or through the exhaust stroke or the intake stroke, and you can hear and see what's happening.
Yeah, so you mentioned the differences between the compression test and the leak down test. That is something that we see when we're reviewing some aircraft logbooks.
Yes.
And the compression test is conducted.
Yes.
I think a lot of the time because they may not have had a leak down tester available, but a leak down test is a mandatory part of scheduled maintenance. So it is a core item of equipment. And where could
we can put a little ad in here. We do sell the fittings that go on to make the ones that will fit a Jabiru spark plugs.
All right, then that can be purchased directly from Jabiru.
No excuses.
Yeah, the little threaded adapter.
We sell leak down
Yeah, the whole kit.
We sell the whole kit, yeah.
as well.
Fantastic. So they can contact info@jabiru.net.au.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, brings us to the last question there, is that what are the safety considerations when conducting this procedure? Because this does involve the propeller, and you always got to treat the propeller as live.
So the leak down test is something where you need to treat the engine as live, even though you may have checked that the magnetos are turned off. In our case, we don't use a conventional magneto. It's a transistorized coil. And with the transistorized coil, you need about 300 RPM to produce enough spark for it to start. So typically, in our case, we don't have the problem with propeller turning, producing a spark to ignite, but there can be other factors into it. But it's just something that you need to consider with any engine for the inevitable. So master off, magnetos off, or maggie switches off, and once you've established the cylinder that you're going to conduct the leak down test, that needs to be a top dead center. You're going to get a second person to hold the propeller at top dead center, and then gradually increase the air into the cylinder until it will either, if you're either side or top dead center, you will feel the propeller pull one way or the other, and stand away from the propeller when the air is actually put into the cylinder, because if it lets go, the propeller will continue to turn, because you've essentially got one spark plug out of each cylinder and there's no resistance, and then we'll just spin and spin and spin until you've got 80 psi going in, and it's trying to get that 80 psi somewhere else. So it uses the propeller as as the weak link.
Whack you very, very hard.
I would definitely recommend, two people carry out the task. Alrighty. Well, we have a video that you have produced about carrying out the leak down test, which we will play now at the end. It'll bring this discussion to a close. So, in the first instance, if you have any questions, please consult the Jabiru website at jabiru.net.au and refer to the Jabiru aircraft technical manuals.
Also have a technical site on our website under support, and it's called the Jabiru Technical Forum. And so on there's a lot of questions that are frequently asked, and the answers can be often found there first as well, which saves phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
And
you can also find them in the middle of the night or whenever, on the weekend.
Yes, the questions, you can find the answers there. So we'd like people to use that resource as much as possible as well.
So thank you, Sue, Jamie, and Dan for joining me for this discussion. It's been very informative, and we hope to do this again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe. Bye.
All right, and we'll now go to the leak down test video.
Okay, today we're going to carry out a pressure differential leak down test. For the purpose of this video, it's actually 100 hourly that we're going to do on this J170C, and it's a Gen 4 engine where I've just run the engine and the engine is hot as we stipulate in the manual. So the first step is to remove the spark plug from each cylinder and carry out the leak down test. So with an 18mm spark plug socket, we're removing one spark plug. It doesn't matter whether it's intake or exhaust. So the purpose of a differential leak down test is to check the cylinder bore, the rings, the cylinder head connection to the barrel, and whether the intake or exhaust valves are sealing correctly. And all this is done at top dead center on each cylinder. What we have here is a pressure leak down differential tester, and what we're aiming for is to have 80 psi from the compressor coming in, and we're measuring the difference that the cylinder is measuring coming out. So with this adjusting knob, you can adjust it higher or lower depending on your compressor capability, and this will change when we plug it in. Here we have the adapter that screws into the cylinder, and the adapter is the same thread as the spark plug. So screwing this into the cylinder, simulates the spark plug. This only has to be firm, and we will connect our outgoing pressure into the adapter. Okay, so what we need to do now is find where top dead center is on number 1 cylinder, and to do this, with your thumb over the adapter, we're turning the propeller around and feeling the air pressure come out of the leak down at top dead center. When it gets to top dead center, then it will start to suck. So from this point here, we need a second person to hold the propeller, and now we have Cody, who's going to be our lovely assistant. So at this point here, we're going to reconnect the pressure tester to the cylinder, and with the pressure tester turned off, we're going to adjust the pressure down to 80 psi as the ingoing pressure. The pressure will change if somebody has an air tool on the same line and you want to try and get as close as you can. You will adjust this after it's connected to the cylinder. So with the pressure turned off, connect the hose to the adapter, making sure that the second person is holding the propeller, turning the pressure on slowly. You see here it's slightly lower than 80 now, so we're going to increase that to 80, and now on this side here we're going to read the differential pressure that's on the cylinder, which is 77. Once we've established the leak down at top dead center, if you do have a low reading, so we're looking for a maximum of 25% differential loss, which is equates to about 60 over 80. For anything below that, then you need to investigate further where that may be coming from. So possible causes are past the rings, you will get air coming out the breather when you do the test, but if it's excessive air past the rings and cause crankcase pressure, you will get that through the breather. If it's coming out the exhaust valve, past the exhaust valve, you will get air coming out the tailpipe of the exhaust. If it's on the intake side, you will hear that through the back of the carburetor or through the intake line. So we've established that 77 over 80, turn that off, disconnect, and then transfer that number onto the top of the crankcase as a reference that we're going to transfer onto the maker sheet. So the second cylinder that we're going to do is number 2. It doesn't have to be in that order. Either way, you're going to achieve top dead center on each cylinder. So for the purpose of this, we're going over to number 2, putting our adapter into the second cylinder. Checking that it's firm, finger over the outlet, turning the propeller until we achieve the air coming out the adapter. So once again, we've got our second person holding the propeller, connecting tube, adjusting that as close to 80 as we can, applying the pressure, adjusting that back up now to achieve 80, and when you are at top dead center there should be virtually no load on the propeller itself. So on this cylinder, once again we're seeing 77. You can turn the propeller either way slightly and you will get that variation if there's any ovality in the cylinder itself, where the rings are bedding more on the cylinder. You will get that variation. So let's achieve 77, turning that off, disconnecting, and writing the leak down figure on the crankcase. Okay, so there we have it. So we've completed our leak down on the Gen 4 engine. Just for the purpose of this video, we'll carry on with the rest of the 100 hourly. Obviously there's a lot more to the annual or 100 hourly checks that we do, and if there's any other questions or need any more information, we do have a very detailed engine maintenance manual for the reference. So we will put the spark plugs back in, new spark plugs gapped, and continue. So